the energy industry would not be labeled as creative. I think it is one of the most creative industries. Seeing my dad just work so hard and incorporate us into it, that's what set all of us up. Everybody has different expertise. I would say I'm probably more artistic. I had some little small companies that were in the construction industry in college to kind of make some money on the side. All through this time, I'm like coding nights and weekends, trying to figure out how to build something. And learning those systems, that was an absolute pivotal moment because it taught me how to think creatively about business. And as soon as I landed to Houston, this was like 2015, we had a downturn. And that was very difficult because
you're a technology company that works in energy.
Creativity is everything. When we say innovation where it's least expected, it's about executing, bringing the innovation actively into an operator that wants to partner with you. Because you can go and sell technology all day, but if you don't have the right partner, it's not going to work. To get your product out there, to have it visually differentiated, to get some traction, it is incredibly important to make it look cool.
If people are going to remember your technology, you have to tell a story behind that.
Skydiving is so fast. You have this whole world that's incredibly intense, right? When you apply that to business, things seem slower when you're not going 150 miles an hour.
Looking ahead, Jeff, what's next for you in terms of continuing to innovate and like what are you excited for in the near future?
I think narrowly, I'm excited for...
I want to explore a little bit like your family background. Obviously, you're in business with family, working with your brothers at Aerion.
Yeah.
But zooming back, I want to understand a little bit what that dynamic was like growing up, and what were some of your inspirations like from your family, like for business and as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So my dad is definitely the sort of cornerstone of business, I think, for myself and my brothers. We grew up in sugarcane fields in South Louisiana, sort of at the juncture of Breaux Bridge, Karen Crow, and Lafayette, Louisiana, north side of Lafayette. And there was a lot of like freedom out there, right? We grew up on these big piece of land. All of our family lived out there. We got to ride four-wheelers, blow stuff up. Really interesting upbringing, and there were absolutely rules, but there were also just kind of like freedom to go and build, right? Like that's how I see it retrospectively. It's like you're able to start building something from a young age. That's how I felt about it. And my dad started out selling shoes, and then he began building homes or doing carpentry work in between while they started having kids, us, my brothers, and myself. And it was just such a cool story because I think as it goes, and I may be getting some pieces wrong, but my dad, the builder, walked off the job site. And so my dad was like, I'm going to finish this house because he was just on the crew. And so selling shoes, started building houses, and then he had some really nice people that he was like, I'm going to start developing, these pieces of land, and really started from nothing, right? And he just is so instrumental in that way because we saw it growing up, how hard he worked, and the creativity in, he did residential construction, and then he did some commercial stuff. And I'll just give an example. We were probably, I might have been 7 or 8, maybe a little bit younger, but they were pouring a industrial slab the next day for like these just industrial buildings, right? And it was raining, and my dad didn't want the project to be delayed. So we all got out. I don't know if we were in bed or what. It probably wasn't that dramatic, but it was at night and it was raining. And my dad parked his Suburban with the headlights on the slab, and we dug out the footings. Yeah. And it was like the funnest thing ever because like it was raining and the slab's filled with water, and we're like kids, like, running through the mud, just digging out these footings to drain the footings so that they could pour, in a reasonable amount of time. And so that was just such a unique upbringing, and just like anybody in their experience growing up, you don't really realize the uniqueness that your life is until you get a little bit older, right? And so seeing my dad just work so hard and incorporate us into it was a true, that's what set all of us up. I would absolutely say. There's another funny anecdote is, so we had these fields. My dad used to, we call it bush hogging. It's where you cut the grass with a big tractor, right? And so we used to each sit on each side of him, and I would sit on his lap. So my brothers on each side of the tractor, me on his lap. My brothers had their pellet guns, and the field mice would be jumping out as you would cut the grass, and they would shoot them. We probably never even actually shot anything, but it was like there was always fun, and there was always this like idea of, it just felt super unique, and just incorporated us into every single thing. We cleaned houses between each phase of construction, and he'd let us get hammers and start nailing boards together. Like I remember being very young, having a hammer and some boards, and like he's like walking around talking to the guys that are working on the job site, and we're just like making skateboard ramps and like just, I don't know, it's just so cool. And that's absolutely what set sort of the foundation for at least myself. I'm not going to speak for my brothers, but I would venture to say that's probably had a really good impression on them as well.
And you're the youngest brother of three? Is that correct?
So it's myself and two older brothers.
Right.
Yes.
So do you think that dynamic as the youngest and the competition between you and your brothers like helped you a lot as well?
I would say we weren't really competitive. I don't think, at least that's not how I saw it. I admired them, and still admire them, but they were, we're all 4 years apart. So I got to see what each one of them were doing, and I would always want to do that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
they were doing something cool, and I was like, I want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So it was more of an inspiration than a competition, and we like really never fought, which is kind of shocking. I mean, sure, we had wrestling matches and stuff like that every now and then, but it wasn't like fights, right? Like you may hear from some people. Uh, but it was really cool growing up. We'd ride dirt bikes, and like I would lay down, and my brother would jump me on his dirt bike like back in the day, and we would just build ramps in our backyards. And they always, were the older ones, and so it was like I always wanted to do what they were doing. Yeah. And they incorporated me into it, which was always really cool.
Yeah, it sounds like a great upbringing. You had that inspiration from your dad, and
Yeah.
like he incorporated you in all the work he was doing,
Yeah.
as well as like a good gap between your siblings, that it wasn't too close, it was too competitive, but you had enough
Yeah.
to see the cool stuff they were doing and take inspiration from that.
Exactly. Yeah. And everybody has different expertise. I would say I'm probably more on the artistic end of the spectrum. And my middle brother and older brother, everybody has their strong suits, and nobody's battling for any sort of domain. It's a really interesting dynamic for sure.
And it's funny you mentioned art. I think that leads us perfectly into our next topic of conversation. I want to talk a little bit about liberal arts degrees, because I know you're a major in advertising. I want to ask the question, what is the value of a liberal arts education?
So, hyperbolic statement, fair warning. I think they're amazing degrees. There's a lot of conjecture like that they are a throwaway degree. I'm just going to get it and get out of school. My experience was different. I went to school, University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and I was actually in business management, and it didn't feel like I was able to flex that creative muscle like I was used to doing, right? And again, growing up the way I grew up, it was kind of just like follow your whimsy in a lot of ways. So like I was very used to like building stuff, just like being creative. And so the business management route, I think I took one semester, and I was like, I have to do something. This is not for me, but I still want to have a business bent to it, right? I didn't want to just go straight art. So I was like, okay, liberal arts. And then I think I was like into stocks and trading and stuff like that. And Carl Icahn is like this notorious, activist investor. And I read one of his books, and I was like, okay, well, it seems like he had a creative career. Like, it seems like a liberal arts degree can apply to many different types of people, not just someone who wants to get out of school, which I also wanted to get out of school. But I was able to go into the College of Liberal Arts at UL Lafayette. And the cool thing about it is that they were the first, I think, college, or the first school in the college to get Macs. So they had brand new Macs. So I kind of like went check it out, and I was like, this is definitely for me, because I came from a school that had some Macs, and so I was like, Macs didn't proliferate like they have now, right? So still earlier days, yeah. And so I just dove headfirst into it. I had some little small companies that were in the construction industry in college to kind of make some money on the side. And I applied the advertising to my businesses. So we had your semester projects where you build a campaign, you build all the imagery, and I did all that. I did it in Adobe Illustrator, InDesign, Dreamweaver back in the day. Shout out to retro software, because Dreamweaver is retro software. And learning those systems and how to like navigate networking and stuff like that, because we had to like send it to our teacher over the intranet at the school. And you look back at certain pivotal moments, that was an absolute pivotal moment, because it taught me how to think creatively about business, right? And then being around entrepreneurs my whole life, you marry those two things together and you have a creative output. And so that's what my liberal arts degree did for me. And again, there's need for specialization. Of course, you don't want your doctor probably having just a liberal arts degree. You want him to be good at whatever he's going to be operating on. But if you want to be creative and you love business as well, can't go wrong with liberal arts degree, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think, like you said, not everyone can have a liberal arts degree because there is a need for specialization. But when you look at the statistics, like a third of all Fortune 500 CEOs have liberal arts degrees, like half of world leaders come from that background as well. So I think it's pretty evident that having that flexibility and creativity is very important in the business world. And
Absolutely.
it's often overlooked, I believe. I think there's a huge misconception that, like, you study a liberal arts degree, it's a waste of
they're like
waste of your
they equate it with
50
like
grand.
underwater basket weaving, right? Like some just abstract, like not gonna do anything for you. And that may be true to some degrees. I mean, there's a certain amount of it is like what you do with what you learn. But that my degree absolutely set me up to learn software. That's like the fundamental thing I can point back to and be like, I learned these things, and they contributed to what I do now in a big way.
And how important do you think it is to have that creativity and that experimental background when you're coming into a technical industry like energy?
I think it's everything. I think the energy industry would not be labeled as creative. I think it is one of the most creative industries, in my opinion. You look at there's like these larger than life characters in oil and gas, like these CEOs that have started these companies from nothing and then grew into the massive independent producers like out in the Permian. And these guys are like caricatures of human beings, right? Like the Harold Hams out of Oklahoma, all these people, Aubrey McClendon, the late Aubrey McClendon, all these people were incredibly creative, right? And it's not often thought about just because of the hyperbolic nature of energy in general nowadays, or, oil and gas, fossil fuel industry. Creativity is everything. And I see it exhibited in, like our side of the business. On upstream, you have the way they put together equipment on a rig, right? Yeah. These welders are welding, and like you have to come up with an idea that meets all the criteria, that's safe and going to be effective for what you're doing. All of that's creative, but it's not often thought about as a creative endeavor, but it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was your early experience like? So this background in advertising, I guess you had some experience like working technically, like growing up with your family, but what was it like taking that jump from working liberal arts degree to starting out in the energy industry, working in the field?
So my middle brother moved to Arkansas to start the company in the Fayetteville Shale days. This is when Arkansas was kind of kicking off. And he moved with a pump and a mattress. I loaded him up. Both cried. It was very dramatic and very funny in retrospect, and an amazing start to an awesome story. And so the business started, all of that. I ran parts on the weekends and stuff like that to Arkansas. I'd go hang out with them up there. And then I worked some frack water heating jobs on the weekends just to earning a little extra money. And that got me some exposure. And then after school, I was like, okay, I could stay in Lafayette, Louisiana, or I could move away. And I felt like the right thing to do for me was like to expand my horizons, right? So I go to a Mardi Gras ball in New Orleans, and then I get on a plane like the next morning, very early, and then land in Ohio, Canton, Ohio, to start my career. So that's how I started my career. Not a great start, a little hungover, but it was fine. And so I lived in Ohio, and I was managing. So Chesapeake started drilling in Ohio, and rigs migrated from northeastern Pennsylvania down to the Panhandle and into Ohio. And so I moved up there. I lived in a trailer park in the south of Ohio and called on all the rigs. I was doing both sales and management at the time of like equipment movements. I wasn't a great manager, admittedly. And so I was better at the sales end of things. So I did field sales, and then I moved into, so I started seeing on the boards out there that you had this, like your well name and everything. It was all the details about the rig. And I saw like drilling engineer, and my brother was like, you have to talk to the drilling engineers. So I was like, okay. So they're in the various cities wherever the operator is calling the shots out of, which is like Oklahoma City, Dallas, Houston, Midland, Denver on average, San Antonio maybe. And so I see the name on there, and a guy named Buddy Manuel, I was like, I got his name. Okay. So I'm like, I would just fly to Oklahoma City. And I'm like, they're like, what are you going to Oklahoma City for? I'm like, oh, I have a meeting. Said I didn't have a meeting. I just flew there because I was like, I'm going to figure out how to meet with this guy, right? Because he was over that stuff. And so I emailed him. He luckily answered the email. And then we went out to dinner and showed me around the campus. Incredibly nice person. And that's what kicked off sort of my career in sales. So migrated from management to rig sales to city sales is what we call it. And that started off my career. I then moved to Pittsburgh from Canton, Ohio. Canton, Ohio is fine. It was not my cup of tea. Pittsburgh was more, I guess, metropolitan, interesting. I was by Carnegie Mellon. Google had a robotics facility there as well. So on the weekends, I would go to a place called the Tech Shop. And so I saw this innovation, but it was like unrelated to the oil and gas, which we'll move on to in a little while. So I'm seeing all this. I'm like, man, technology is what I wanted to be into, because at the time you had like Facebook and all these companies kicking off. And that's kind of what our generation was sold. Like you have to start some big tech company, right? But when you're in this, you're like, how does this make sense together, right? And so you fast forward, I end up moving to Houston from Pittsburgh after working with Hess. I landed some Hess work. And so Hess was a big company. And as soon as I landed to Houston, this was like 2015, we had a downturn. So as soon as I hit city sales, it's like complete tank. And that was very difficult because you are new city. And then all of a sudden people are getting laid off. Nobody will answer your email. And so that's how I started in Houston. And I've been there for like 10 years. All through this time, I'm like coding nights and weekends, trying to figure out how to build something, right? I had an idea for this. I'd build it. I wasn't a developer at the time, a very good developer. I'd build like WordPress sites and stuff like this. And I was not headed in the right direction. And I thought the oil field wasn't either, right? I was like, this will never change. They're running these legacy systems that I don't see how this is going to change. So I thought about exiting many times. I just kind of hung in there and kept working and kept, figuring out how to program and stuff like that. And then you started seeing things like Corva pop up. Right. Corva is a massive company now, and they do all kind of amazing stuff and handle really cool, AI development, stuff like that for upstream. But that was very early days. And so I was like, I don't have that technical expertise. Like, how can I get to that point, right? And so still struggling. And then I take over Aerion's IT function right? Because I got enough knowledge to get there, and started building some low code stuff, right? And saw how the inner workings of the process made some things more efficient, and then we continue moving along, and then we get into 2020, and we are working on a contract with a big operator, and we create something to measure drilling fluids in real time. And this was like a very baseline product. I mean, we're talking bare bones, not a whole lot of tech in it, but that started the path, right? Yeah. And that's what got me into working hardcore on technology.
Yeah. And when you're looking at Aerion, like you guys frame yourselves,
yeah,
like you're a technology company that works in energy.
That's right.
And you've taken all of these inspirations, like seeing energy as an industry, like there's a need for innovation. And I'm going to take these ideas and try to apply it to my work at Aerion.
So, you know, how Aerion started with pumps and stuff like this, then we got into solids control, and that's been sort of the core of the business is solids control, right? And solids control, you're basically, the rig is drilling, they use mud to drill with. We process the mud, right? The mud is, you could think about it as the blood in your body. That is the lifeblood of the drilling rig. And that is what Aerion does, is processes that. And so things were getting cheaper, cell phones, all of these things, modems, IoT was coming around, but things weren't quite there yet, right? Like the connectivity was incredibly expensive. To be able to get data into the rig systems was harder. And then all that abstraction kind of has been removed. And then that's where we are now.
Bringing innovation where it's least expected. What does that mean to you?
So historically, like many parts of the oil field, not very innovative, right? It's there's a term called dumb iron out there, and that means to have equipment that sort of just sounds what it is, right? It's not smart equipment. You just rent it. And I have a belief, and I think that is coming about, that you're seeing it, is that dumb iron is getting smarter, right? You're able to put computers basically on it, ingest data, build algorithms to get the output. And you have all these disparate gaps in what the drilling engineers, the data that they're getting, right? Yeah. So like wireline, for example, the higher ticket items get the technology first is a good way to put it, right? So you work your way down the stack of drilling equipment. There still needs to, these companies are going to be required to have a data stream for their equipment that has basically PLCs on it and different stuff like this. But the barrier to get there, I don't see, there are companies doing it, but smaller companies are not. And that's where we're sort of changing things, right? Like we're connecting centrifuges to the internet and getting operators centrifuge runtime data, which is very important for rigs. And then we're creating a drilling fluid monitoring system that monitors all the properties that they want to see on, like, say, a mud report in real time. And so when we say innovation where it's least expected, that's what we're talking about. People aren't expecting it from, say, a solids control company. A lot of people go out there and pitch stuff, right? It's about executing and bringing the innovation actively into an operator that wants to partner with you, which is a very important part, because you can go and sell technology all day, but if you don't have the right partner, it's not going to work.
How important is it to lean on your partners?
Very important. You want them, like, it has to be an even thing, right? Everybody has to participate, from the office to the rig. The superintendents, when everybody's on board, and especially the mud company, because we, process their fluids. So there's like this finger pointing game. Everybody's like, it's your job. And you're like, well, surely somebody's at fault for this, right? And so there's always been this historical finger pointing game that has happened between our niche part of the industry, which is drilling mud, and solids control, the service we provide. And when you deploy new technology, all these opposing forces can exist out there. But when you have everybody on the same page, it's much easier to do things. And so while you want to roll out the technology to anybody that will fund it, the downside is that they may not be on board. You may have some stakeholder that you really need to want to participate, but they're not on board. So you look for that, and I think all these things happen by trial and error, right? You'll roll it out, it'll be a failure, and then you'll kind of hone your product, and then you'll roll it out to the right people. It'll work, and they'll be on board with it, and they'll want to support it, and that's kind of your springboard.
Right. Experimentation is very important, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have an interesting new technology that's in the works at the moment.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Aerion real-time monitoring system that you've been working on?
Yeah, so it's called ARM, and what it is it's basically a control panel with a series of sensors. There's an edge computer on it running an algorithm, and that algorithm produces what is equivalent to a mud report. The mud report is something that historically has been it's done by a mud check. So you produce a mud report from a mud check, and you're literally taking a stick, dipping it in the fluids, burning what's called a retort, which is you're burning off the oil, the water, you're calculating that, you're getting the solids content, and then you know what's in your drilling fluids effectively. That's like the dumbed down version of what this is, right? So that's typically been done once or twice a day for the past 75 years. So what we're doing is we have an array of sensors that will produce that output every second, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I find it very interesting the way that you've presented the technology as well. Like it's very visually memorable.
Yes.
And what was the thought process behind creating such a brand behind this new technology, and how important do you think it is in branding new technologies in this way?
It's super important. You can take a lesson from like Liberty Oilfield, Nomac Drilling. I'll give you an example. Nomac back in the day when I worked in the Northeast in Ohio, they rolled out their Peak Series rigs, okay? They were all wrapped, and they all had like an American theme, right? They had like a big eagle on the side. And so it was their new technology, their new series of rigs, but like it was amazing, right? Like Jim Cramer from Mad Money went out to a rig, and you see these beautiful wrapped rigs. It's like, oh, wow, like something's changing. And so taking that aesthetic and bringing it to our product was incredibly important. So we went through this rebranding effort, and one of the pieces of it was like, let's brand this piece of equipment, which is the arm. And so when you're walking around a rig, there is more branded, there's more wraps and stuff like that on equipment. It's a harsh environment, so the wraps it really doesn't make sense to wrap every piece of equipment, I don't think, because it is going to just get torn up. But I think to get your product out there and to have it visually differentiated, to get some traction, to get people to notice it, it is incredibly important to make it look cool. And we've actually gotten comments, that's a pretty piece of equipment. And
right.
That could go either way with the guys on the rig. I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment, but they're noticing it. So that's what's important.
Yeah. And it's the story you tell about the products as well. Like if people are going to remember your technology, you have to tell the story behind that.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to, because you can keep it quiet, and there's like a time when you should do that when you're developing it, right? And then you have all the protections in place, but it's very important to create an identity, right? Exactly. For different things, because you want that differentiation. Like obviously Apple, for example, everything they do has its own vertical, like this Apple Watch, right? It's like distinctive that it is this model, and same with their other products. And so if you extrapolate that onto oil field equipment, you've seen a real big uptick in the branding of equipment. But we found that it was going to be very important because we wanted to set ourselves apart from what we were seeing in the market. Yeah.
Where did you find inspiration from?
Well, Elon Musk is a big one. I know that, again, it's like he's a controversial character nowadays. But I think that, everything they pump out, from Tesla to SpaceX to the Boring Company, all of their stuff has distinct branding, and it's a lesson, I think, even if like the product isn't quite up to snuff. Like obviously there's been controversies around Tesla, certain integrity components, right? This or that, but the look
Yeah.
is impeccable.
Yeah.
And so that is like of the utmost importance. And so looking at, people like Elon Musk, I think there's intelligent wellheads, well services, or they were just bought by Patterson, I believe.
Yeah.
They have these frac monitoring rigs, and and I'm speaking about this because it's in the oil field. They've done a good job with sort of branding their equipment, and so when you see like companies like Corva on the software in Combo Curve on their end. I don't know too much about that side of the business, but you see this distinction.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly important to create. And so in our narrow part of the oil field, that's what I did is I looked around and sought that inspiration from people that I thought were doing really cool stuff. And Midnight Marketing, shout out,
Yeah.
is a big, you definitely are at the top of the game when it comes to implementing this in the oil field.
Hope you guys are enjoying the show. If you want to learn more about us, at Midnight Marketing, we're experts in branding, web design, and digital marketing. We help you tell your brand story, and you're in the driver's seat. We don't work with contracts, unlimited services, cancel anytime.
We're talking custom 3D animations, 2D tailored graphics, local and global SEO, targeted campaigns. We do it all. And we've got a team of crazy talented creatives behind us making it all happen. Obviously, everything's on the website, so don't even worry. The question is, are we going to take your brand to the moon? Absolutely we are.
Test drive us for a month today. Check the link in the show notes for a free brand audit.
Dude, we already spoke about this last time.
All right, Bella, that's enough. Back to the show. Appreciate that. I think you're right. Your identity, your brand really matters. And as you're growing a company, that like how people remember you, like how you present yourself, it really makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Going more from the business angle to like personally, like where do you take inspiration from some of your passions and implement that into your work?
Yeah. So I'll make the analogy. I used to be a big skydiver. I had a skydiving accident where I like almost killed myself. But the skydiving is so fast, and there's just so much safety. Even though it did hurt myself, it was sort of an issue that I created, a safety issue. But you have this whole world that's incredibly intense, right? You're learning how to do it. You're like unaware for the first 80 skydives. At least that was for me. And then all of a sudden, your like world kind of opens up, and and when you're in free fall, you have some time to think, right? Yeah. So when you look at it from that perspective, and then you start applying that and looking at these harder problems, it becomes more intuitive, if not just for the implementation of the process. Like to learn to skydive, you have to move from this to this to this. You have to get more advanced, and there's so much training that goes into it, and so many steps and checks and this. So the process and setting up a process is like hugely important. So when you apply that to business, that gives you like you both things seem slower when you're not going 150 miles an hour, right? So you can sort of make these distinctions and set up these processes that enable you to just be more concise about everything.
Yeah, like being calm under pressure, jumping out of a plane.
Exactly, yeah.
Any problem that comes up in business is light work.
Exactly. And so that's, I take my inspiration from skydiving. I work out a lot. Like I watch these silent YouTube videos, which is a very good example of content creation, right? Because you have, I don't like people talking when I'm trying to work out. Or I'll listen to a podcast, but I don't like to take instruction from an instructor. So I like built this little gym in my house, and I have a TV, and this guy, Daniel Fitness, does these workout routines with kettlebells. And his early videos, he started with talking, and then he stopped. And so he previews the movements of the next round during rest. And so it's like 30 seconds on, 10 seconds off of rest. And so that has been a huge inspiration for me with everything, because it's like there's no words, but it's incredibly effective. Right. It's been a huge inspiration to me just all around, both with health, and just getting content out there and the message out to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're big on automation.
Yeah. I think that everything's going to be automated to a degree. I don't think it's a cure-all, but I just see there's so much room for automation, specifically in oil and gas, and it's on the horizon. Yeah.
What do you think like the main power of automation is? Like what's the opportunity there?
So the example of the product, the arm that we have, is you're taking while we're not seeking to replace a process, we're seeking because you've got like unevenness in the mud, you can get false readings, like all these, it's not perfect. But having the fidelity of a process that only happens twice a day when it is integral to the operations of a rig, right? And the safety, really, uh, and having that automated, you have all this time in between those checks that things could go awry, right? And so automating that process is a huge gain. And it's the same with many other parts of drilling rigs that you're starting to see automated and that we hope become automated. It's to me, it's like the price of automation is coming down so much, and the ability for someone to implement it without having like being a PhD in engineering is a huge gain. And so I think it will be, everything will be more automated in the future.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of great opportunities for it, but I think there's also like in the process of working this out, there is still some bumps in the road. Like
Absolutely.
I feel like automation sometimes causes problems.
Yes.
You know, when automation could be solved by the human being that first point of contact.
Yes.
Like, for example, social media algorithms, like usually the process in automation and like flagging content is messy and like accounts can be taken down without like prior warning.
Right.
And I feel like that's dangerous. There's certain dangers that I think we have to be aware of when we're automating to a certain degree.
Yeah, I think that like, and I'll keep shilling our product, but it's a good point. Is like you wouldn't want to take the person that's done this for 50 years out of the equation. That's not the intent. That is a lot of people's feelings about automation and it was going to put me out of a job. It's not, right? Your job might change, but it would change with the advent of Excel over writing something, right? Like it's just all step changes. And to your point, you don't want to automate everything that can't have human intervention. You absolutely have to have human intervention. You can't just get complacent with an automated process.
Yeah, because there's a certain limitation. Like you're talking to a chatbot trying to solve a problem. It's like, please just connect me to a human being so I can solve the issue, because
Exactly.
the data that's been trained on usually has limitations and your problem doesn't always fit within that.
Exactly. But it can be helpful, right? Like, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it can definitely like support the process, but I think there has to be a balance for sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So automation, you do a lot of that within your consulting side of things. Like how have you approached that, and how do you approach problem solving when it comes to helping other businesses, step up their game and automate some of their processes?
So there's, business automation, like HR suite into Microsoft 365, for example, right? You have HR, you have IT admins. The problem with this is that information could be late, person starting, it's not helpful for them to get their sign-in information in 2 weeks. 2 weeks after, right? They've been onboarded, like they're sitting waiting for an account. So on the consulting side, there's just what I've seen is that I put out content to be able to build these things, and that it's been hugely helpful because you're relaying the information from the start process to the person starting process, right, into IT. And so when you automate that, you don't have double entry, you don't have incorrect entry, you have one source of truth that is beginning and then shoots it over to this system, right, through an API connection or a webhook, if anyone knows what those things are. And so via these APIs and webhooks, you can start connecting all these disparate systems to talk to one another. And again, these things can go awry, right? It's not perfect, but adding in that automation is incredibly helpful, I'm finding, for businesses.
Yeah, I think there's so much opportunity there, and a lot of businesses just don't know how to work with automation. So I think there's a huge need
Absolutely.
for companies to, I mean, just thinking my daily work, there's a lot of tasks that you do are repetitive and take up a lot of time that with the right knowledge and help, you could easily automate, and that just saves you up time to do more creative stuff.
That's right. Yeah, it's it high grades what you're doing, right? Like your work becomes more effective as a result of the automation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the main opportunity that we have with AI. It's
Right.
like everyone's scared, like, oh, it's going to replace me and like take away all our jobs. But really, it allows us to be more effective and like multiply our efforts and build more products.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like it's a helpful assistant.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah. Like looking ahead within energy, what do you think the future is going to look like within?
This is something I'm super excited about because you're starting to see glimpses of it. I think there's probably a data governance thing with implementing LLMs in older software products. Inveris is a big oil or energy data company, and they're starting to release, basically a wrapper into some LLM. I'm not sure the back end stuff, but that gets you quicker to insights, right? There's other companies that are doing this, and I think that AI is such like a buzzwordy term, right? Because we've been talking about it forever. But to me, like we're having this conversation before we started talking here, like you have the distillation of information and getting it actionable is what these LLMs are doing, right? Like having had learning issues, in my younger life, if I would have had these tools to explain something to me in a different way or allow me to like corral my thoughts into producing the answer, it probably would have been very helpful. That's why I'm very excited just, having young kids, what that's going to offer to them, right? And so going back to the energy topic, it's like I see drones, delivery drones. I see LLMs plugged into all your data sources, which is another hyperbolic statement because there's this argument like, what data? The data has to be clean. Like there's a lot of things to work through there. But I think ultimately it'll just be hooked into all your data, whether that's a product Microsoft does or somebody other company, right? So that'll just be an entire layer of the tech stack. I see, like I said, delivery drones is my one hope, having run parts to rigs. And you're seeing it with Amazon. I think there's various companies doing pilots with these drone deliveries, but you have these pretty vast distances in the oil field. And I think that you'll start to see heavy lift drones coming about to where you can hot shot a hose or something like that from point A to point B. Now there's restrictions on drones right now, both regulatory in the US because of the FAA, but then you have capabilities on flight times and stuff like this with batteries versus gas powered. But I think that if you look into the future and we see all the things happening, like with Tesla, for example, we'll go back to all these types of things. You apply that, the costs come down, right? This gets applied to young business owners in the oil field, come up with these ideas. And then it looks like drone delivery to rigs or autonomous truck part deliveries to rigs or drones flying out an Optimus Tesla robot to a midstream location, right? That's what I see. And I'm absolutely here for it and I want to participate in it.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
Like there's so much opportunity for innovation with some of the tech that's coming out right now. And if you look ahead, like in the next like 10, 20 years, it's crazy to think like some of the innovations that are going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really cool to think about what the oil field could end up like because, everybody's trying to kill it, but you can't. I think with more technology, it's going to get cleaner. And there's a real need for it. So my thing is like, if you're young and you want to go in an opposing direction, you probably go into energy. Yeah. If you want to make a contrarian bet, you go into energy.
That's an interesting point that came up in our last podcast conversation. Like if you actually want to make a difference and you're an environmentalist, like the place where you're going to make the most change is actually working within energy, not sitting on the sidelines saying like, you guys are bad.
Yeah, change it from the inside, right? And you're already seeing this with, regulations on methane and stuff like that. Methane, I think, is it methane or methane?
I don't know. I would say methane.
So yeah, we'll call it a draw. I think you know, it's with all this regulation, and there's companies that have cameras on locations, and they're able to spot it and stuff like this. Like, we're better than we were 30 years ago. We're better than we were 10 years ago, right? And I think that process is just going to improve. On the other side, you have with the growth of AI, you need more energy, and we're capacity limited on where that energy is going to come from consistently 24 hours a day, right?
Yeah, even like crypto, like
Yeah.
that needs more mining, and there's an opportunity there for a lot of companies to.
Absolutely. Texas is a big Bitcoin mining, state. It's very incentivized, and I think that's a whole nother topic that I'm absolutely excited about, is the integration of Bitcoin mining within the growth that I've seen. I've tried to figure out how to participate in it. I haven't figured out the angle just yet, but that's going to be, it leaches on excess energy, right? And so you integrate that reduces emissions. I don't know. We're getting innovative, and the younger tier of engineers coming in with the aid of these LLMs to solve the problems. All of these technology development cycles are just going to get faster. I mean, I think that anyone refuting that, barring some like electricity limit that we reach, upper limit, like, it's things are just going to go faster. And so narrowing that down to the energy industry, energy stays as important, gets more important, and needs young engineers and creative people.
What do you think energy can learn from Silicon Valley?
Hopefully not too much. I'm just kidding. No, I think that the systems, the systems thinking, there are, and again, I'm not like an expert on every part of the oil field. I know a narrow part of the oil field, but just in what I've seen some tech companies come into it and get demolished. I've seen tech companies partner with the right people and make headway, right? So I've seen it both ways. And I think that, um, the systems thinking probably, and the growth that Silicon Valley exhibits, is probably the biggest thing, because the faster you are to grow something, the more change it can affect, right? So if we take a lesson from Silicon Valley, I mean, the ramp on these companies is insane. And you're starting, I feel like, to see it with some oil and gas companies, although, the multiples aren't as high, and they're not worth as much as some Silicon Valley companies. But I think that as we get younger generation of engineers that are empowered with these tools, we get as fast, if not faster, than Silicon Valley, right? That's what I think. Like, you look, Diamondback Energy partnering with some small nuclear reactor provider. They're looking at implementing nuclear production to power their oil fields, right? So, like, there's a lot of cool stuff happening that's probably not covered due to the stigma that's on oil and gas. But I think that this new generation of people entering oil and gas, and the younger guys that are in charge of these operators, are incredibly forward thinking, right? And again, Diamondback, Permian Resources, which are, I forget who they were before that, but those guys are like 35 years old, right? It's like they've grown a massive company. And so I think that when you apply that to service companies, there's an incredible amount of innovation left. Yeah.
And how about the other side of the coin, vice versa? Like, what can Silicon Valley learn from energy?
Well, I think that we're starting to see the malignment a little bit of tech companies, meaning like not so, some of the practices are being scrutinized, which I think is a healthy thing. I think if you can't stand up to the light of scrutiny, then maybe you should be doing something different. So I think that it's good to turn up the heat. Turn up the heat on everybody, right? Like make everybody act in good faith. And I think at least the world will be a better place. And so, but on the work ethic end of the spectrum, I think there's a lot of parallels that people might not be as um, aware of, right? Because you have a 24-hour industry that the world depends on in both capacities. You don't think of like tech because people go 9 to 5, but there's an entire night crew somewhere managing servers and all that stuff that's just as intensive as the oil field. It might not be as dusty, hopefully, but it is on par with it. But they don't really cover that. They just cover like kind of the sexy aesthetic of Silicon Valley that everybody, that the movies are about, right?
Yeah, the idyllic image.
Which they're starting to make more oil and gas movies, which is pretty, like Landman, I think, is coming out pretty soon, which is...
I've seen the trailer for that. It looks badass.
Yeah, we need some more content about it. Yeah.
So in general, the whole industry needs more marketing, would you say?
I mean, without a doubt. I think what's cool is that Aerion's not the biggest company, right? Like we're not Halliburton, but contributing to this new regime of marketing, I think is good for the industry, right? Like we see our competitors doing it, and it sheds more light on the industry as a whole. Yeah.
Cool, man. Looking ahead, Jeff, like what's next for you in terms of continuing to innovate, and like what are you excited for in the near future?
I think narrowly, I'm excited for some more mud system automation. I think we process mud, Aerion processes mud, but I think that that fluids in is going to be absolutely automated. It sort of would just be a factory. And I think that doesn't remove someone, because you have to have someone watching these systems and sort of managing and tweaking. So that is on the niche side of things. I think that's a huge thing that I would hope to see, right? And we're trying to facilitate that with the arm and the fluid monitoring, right? So from that end, that's the innovation I hope to see. Yeah.
I like to finish off my podcast with this question. Like, what does it all mean to you? What does happiness mean to you at the end of the day?
Well, happiness means a few things. First and foremost, like being in sync with my family, right? Like being on the same page and a unified front with my wife, and raising our baby, soon to be new baby, right? So like creating that family unit, and the days whenever you're together and it's like cool day in Texas, which is not often, but a cool day walking, going get coffee, that's happiness, right? Career wise, it's creating. Just creating and seeing ideas take off. That is absolute happiness to me.
I love that mindset.
Yeah.
So where can people find more about you, Jeff, or learn more about Aerion?
So Aerion.com, we're about to be putting out a bunch of marketing about the arm, which will probably be out in a few weeks. We're going to hopefully produce a bunch more of these units. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Jeff Bernard. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. Learned a lot from this conversation, and yeah, excited to see what's next and continue innovating.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, and go Montreal.
Let's go. Appreciate it, man.